Hello friends, my name is RagePanda1 and today we're going to be reviewing and testing and checking out Maxroll.gg's guide for the Marksman leveling process. Now the reason this one might be so important is because a lot of people are talking about the Detonating Arrow build and this will lead you straight into that. In fact, you're going to be using a lot of the same skills through the leveling guide. But one thing you got to pay attention to is that even though some builds are using similar skills, it does not make them the same build at all. You could be going for a completely different damage type. You could have one of them's trying to be a dot, one of them's trying to be an on-hit build. There's all sorts of variances that could go on, so don't be confused by the fact that the skills that we're using are basically the same as Detonating Arrow, because we're not using them exactly the same as when we play Detonating Arrow. Today's guide is another one made by Tarek, and of course that means we get our pre-level 5 guide, and I love that so much! Tarek, thank you. You are amazing. This is very useful for new players, especially people who are using a guide for their first character. Since all of this is in the guide here for us, we know that we're just going to go into deep strikes and then we're going to level that until we get to level 5. I'm going to skip that part in the video because you're not going to need to see it. What I am going to talk about is the gearing process, like I always love to talk about. But in this video, I want to cover doing the gearing process as if it is an alt of mine, but I don't have a ton of uniques set aside that are the right level for early game. And I think a lot of us find ourselves in that situation. I play a lot, I have a lot of alts, maybe that means I'm using up all of my early game gear, but I often find I want to go to my stash and build out a character right away, and I don't have everything that I need. There are some tricks that we can do to take care of that, and we can make an actual reasonable build that helps the beginning of the game quite a bit. And at the beginning of this build, we are going to be using a lot of attack speed for melee because we're going to be using purely melee attacks. When we switch to puncture, we can be switching into a bow, but if you have all of your gear that's giving you increased melee attack speed, like the intrinsic on this necklace, you might not want to switch until you have gear that's supporting using a bow, when you could just be doing the same thing, but with a melee attack. Yes, the bow gives us some other advantages like range and all that good stuff, but when it comes to fighting bosses, how much is it saving you really? And since we're reading our guide, as we should, at least for the early setup and all of these other things while we're getting started, we noticed that we're aiming for bleed buffs. They're telling us right here we are trying to generate and maintain bleed buffs. That means when I make a weapon, I want chance to bleed on that weapon, and I want physical damage percentage anywhere that I can get it. Those two things go together and they work really well on a lot of early game builds. And then when we get to single target and we're looking at bosses, for instance, they want us to just spam explosive trap as much as possible and then puncture while we're trying to get our mana back. I'm really looking forward to spamming shift and getting all over the map and just not even worrying about killing everything in front of me, because you know I love to do that, which is exactly why we're going to dive straight in and start making some gear for our early alt character. We're going to call it an early alt. So we've just gotten into town. We haven't really done anything on this character yet, and all I have found is this random spear that happens to have a lot of melee fire damage on it, and this cloth armor that has 0 forging potential. That is not good. But I also found this other piece that has 20 forging potential, so we're going to put that on. And we're going to go to the vendor here. We're going to buy things like this ivory dice. It has a little bit of forging potential. I would be looking for more, but the crit strike chance on it is nice. I need physical damage anyway, and I'm going to show you a trick to fill out the entire rest of this piece of gear. I'm also going to be doing that for some of these other pieces, and I'm just going to look for whatever's got the most forging potential. You do not need to have an account that is very far into the game to be able to do this. You just need to have an alt character that's gone through the game a little bit. So I could buy this belt that has 13 forging potential and 2 things already on it. I don't really care about either of those things. So I'm actually going to buy one that is a little less forging potential, but we might get more out of it. It's a bit of a gamble, but it's worth it. Then we're going to go into the forging menu. For our weapon, I know that I want to stack bleeds, which means I also want physical damage. These ones I'm going to put on by myself. I'm going to choose what's happening here. So we're going to go for a chance to bleed, and if you have them, glyphs of hope help you to maintain and keep crafting a little bit longer, so we'll do that. And then we're also going to put on 1% to physical damage, and that's going to be pretty helpful for us. Be careful here because melee physical damage is different than adding a percentage to physical damage, and it's the percentage to physical damage that's actually going to make our bleed stronger. So here we are, physical damage, boom. Now we've only got 8 potential left. The thing that I want most on this piece of gear is my chance to bleed. So I'm just going to level that up as much as I can and then brick the item, use all the forging potential. I'm not too worried about it. Now, if I planned on using this weapon for a long time, I would wait and use this for forging potential on something else when I got to level 10, probably leveling up the bleed again. By that point in this build, I'm going to be using a bow. So what I would like to do instead is just add some ignite chance, because that's just going to be more damage. It's free real estate at that point. So now we have a pretty decent weapon, and I started with nothing. I didn't use anything from my stash to get this. I found this spear on the ground. It's totally fine. When it comes to these gray items that don't have anything, luckily we have 20 forging potential, but that's not enough to get something in every slot and to have it be super useful. What I know that I want really bad here is I know that I really want to get some dexterity. So I'm going to put on some dexterity. And then I'm going to use a Rune of Discovery. Now, I have 82 of these. You probably don't have that many if you're just in a mid-level account on your main. So I have 3 open slots, and it should be completely free for me to use this Rune of Discovery to just add something random in there. We got a bleed chance per equipped sword. That would have been great if we were equipping swords, but we're not. But we got health regeneration and fire resistance, and that's great. That's all we really care about. This piece is just going to help us go a little bit faster. And when you get quick with crafting, this stuff does not take a long time to do. So, same thing here. Belts. We're going to do physical damage. We'll put that on. Then we'll do our Rune of Discovery. And we'll level up our physical damage as much as we can. And there you go. We've got a reasonable belt. I'm going to do that for as many slots as I can possibly do it for. And I'll be looking at the guide to see what sort of gear I'm trying to construct, so I get the right things in the right places. But it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just giving ourselves a little boost on our alt character to make the leveling process a lot faster. Now, we're not going to cover too much of this beginning area, but I do just want to show you how much damage we're actually doing. Because we took a second or two to just go ahead and put those bleeds on our build, everything is just bleeding away and dying pretty instantly with very little effort for us. And it makes it really fast to clear this area that a lot of times is really painful to get through if you don't have a good move to use. But we don't need much here. We've just got our basic attack and a bunch of bleeds, and we're having a good time. So I hope that helped you in some way. We've gotten to the point already that we're switching into puncture, which is great. So I'm going to have to craft up a bow, but I'm sure you already understand how that works from what I just showed you. What I do want to make sure that you understand is that we are specializing in shift in our second slot. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to get velocity and we want to get momentum. We want to be able to be moving as fast as we can possibly move. And if this is so important that we're putting it in our second slot for specialization, then that should tell you how much they expect you to be clicking this button and how often you should just be dashing through. So we're going to shoot a bunch of things. We're going to try to bleed them. We're going to have them chasing us around. And then we're going to dash. And while that's on cooldown, maybe I'll throw a couple more shots and keep dashing around as fast as I can to get through these maps. We are not trying to farm XP while we're going through campaign. We're trying to get through campaign so that we can farm XP. So I just thought that was worth mentioning. All the gear we made before that was dedicated to bleeds, it's going to be the same. I'm just going to have to make a bow instead of a spear that's doing that for us. And we're going to be riding this build out until level 50. So I'm going to have to play a lot to get this character to the point where we can test the final build, but I think it's going to be worth it. And when we look at the early setup, this is after level 5, they've put in a really great thing here that I would like to put some emphasis on in this video. This early setup, even though we're going to get Detonating Arrow far before level 50, we're not going to switch to using it because different skills scale differently in the end game versus the early game. Some of them start out with a stronger base. Some of them get stronger with gear and additional skill points that you've unlocked for the specialization. So they've decided that puncture is more important all the way until level 50, and we're going to follow along with that. And I wanted to mention one other thing about building our damage for this. While physical damage is also scaling our bleeds, we're also going for ignite a little bit, and damage over time is really good to buff both of those things. So I'm going to be looking for very similar things on my bow, except I'm going to want to get as much flat damage as I can possibly get. We do have percent bow damage here, so I'm looking for flat damage on my bow. There is a little bit of a trick here to using puncture, and I don't know why I've got some people that are just invisible on my screen, but that's a bug that I've been getting on both of the computers I play on. The trick here is that we want people to be lined up. So I like to run through them a little bit and then turn back around and get it going how I need it to be going. I will say, playing on controller, as some of you know that I do, I feel like it's a real downgrade to play on controller with this particular build. If I could aim the line wherever I wanted every time I shot, I would be doing a lot more damage. So I know a lot of people would say that controller is just worse to play on, and even though that's what I play on, I would have to agree. In most cases, having mouse and keyboard would probably just be better. But you can see we're just lining people up, and when we do that, we're clearing out a huge amount of dudes all in one go. If we don't do that, the clear is very slow because we do not have our explosive mines yet. But when we get there, I think it's going to be a whole lot easier to get really quick clear. And when we have our shift and we're constantly using it and getting our movement speed bonuses, we start going real fast and it feels good. So this is a good example. My arrows are shooting every direction except for the one that I want them to shoot. It's causing me a lot of trouble, and it's a problem. So on controller, this build suffers a lot just from AI being bad. When we're doing boss fights here, I've been throwing smoke bomb down and just going to town, and I will actually throw in some acid flasks just to put some poisons up. Like I said, I've got some damage over time in my build, so that helps a little bit. But you can get away with just lining them up and stacking bleeds like I've done there. A classic boss here that we tend to fight, and you might notice there's a mouse cursor on my screen now. Your boy couldn't do it. I couldn't stick with it, man. It was too bad. Do not play this build with controller. It's just not good. That's unfortunate, but it's true. I think something like an acid flask build might be better during that that time period when you are using a controller. That's just my opinion! So I had to change some buttons around to even want to be able to play this, and it's really holding me back because I am not used to it. But the build is doing alright, and it's actually pretty solid now that I am using a mouse. On a controller, I was not impressed, though. That is for sure. One thing I want to mention here is that we're going to be shifting as much as we can possibly shift, but we get a movement speed after that. So we don't want to post up and shoot immediately. We want to use our movement speed after using shift, and then we're going to start shooting. Is it always going to work that way? No. Sometimes you're just going to shift and you're going to stick and shoot. Usually when you're using it like that, you're using shift as a way to dodge somebody's attacks rather than traverse through the map. But if you're using it for traversal and then turning around and shooting the people that are following you, don't turn around and shoot until after you've used up your little movement speed boost. There we go, we slowed down. Now we're blasting. Then we're moving again, and you got it. We blasted. So that's just kind of how I'm rolling with it, and I'm not killing everybody. Not even close, not even a little bit, and yes, I'm going to say that every video. We've reached a very important point. We've got 20 points into our rogue tree. Now we need to go into our next tree, and most people would assume we're a marksman, we're going for marksman. But actually that is not the case. That's not what we're going to do here today. We're going to go into Falconer for 5 points because we want to get explosive trap, and that's going to happen before we put a single point into marksman, because this is what we really want to be throwing out most of the time. And of course we're going for more damage with haste and more chances to get haste. This build has a lot of that in it. And the great thing here is that when you have more damage with haste, it's another multiplicative multiplier that we're adding on to everything that we're doing, and that just works towards global damage. But since it's a special different kind of global damage, it's a multiplicative modifier, and that's why we love it. We want to stack more of those, as many as we can possibly get, to do the most damage that we can do. One thing a lot of people forget when they're doing a build like this is that we are doing bleeds. That's our whole point here. So we can stack up a whole bunch of bleeds and run around and then just leave. Like, we don't have to get the last hit on whatever object or thing we're trying to fight. I hit those guys, they're bleeding, they're going to die. I can keep moving. And if you can maximize that and get used to your build and how much damage you're doing with your bleeds and when you can stop and run, you're going to save yourself a ton of time in the leveling process. And, of course, in the Monolith process, when you're just fighting as many monoliths as you possibly can do, and you're trying to just get them done and get to the next one, that's really going to help you do the job. Now that we've got Explosive Trap unlocked, we've got our 5 points into the Falconer tree. Now we're finally going to head into the Marksman tree, and we're going to start getting ourselves some sustain with draining arrows, and we're going to specialize in explosive trap in our third slot. And I like the interesting path we're taking around the corner here. We're avoiding one extra point into minefield, and we're getting some mana cost reduction, which I'm sure is going to be an extremely helpful thing. But I'm real excited to start getting into my explosive trap, and maybe I can switch back to controller, which would be awesome. I would love that. Using a controller has been just fine again, and I'm happy to say that. But one thing that I've noticed about these bombs is it's another example of where you can get yourself into overkill territory and you're spending way too much mana, way too much time, just standing there waiting for the things to die when they're already dead anyway. The writing is on the wall. It's time to just keep moving. So that's one thing that you really have to worry about with this build. It seems like that's going to be the case for the entire time. You could be wasting a lot of time if you're continuing to fight somebody who doesn't need to be fought anymore. So we're going to take a look at this boss damage and see how it works now that we have our arrow traps, and I have a feeling it's going to be pretty good. Pretty good. And the whole theory here is we're just spending all of our mana and then we're puncturing until we have mana. I like how that auto switched to the annoying target. That's I'm alright with that part of it. And then we shift around to not take damage. So, pretty simple stuff, actually, and I think it's going to be like that until level 50. Alright, I'm not going to lie to you here. This build has not been my favorite, and it's been very hard to use because it's not very friendly with the controller. But one thing that's very important is that you're putting down decoys to distract enemies, and then you blow them all up together. Unfortunately, it has a long cooldown, and when the cooldown is going, it feels really bad. I find attack speed to be super helpful on this build, because otherwise you're stuck in place. It's like you're rooting yourself in place for a million years just to try to get an attack off, and that is not helping you succeed at all. And then you have these characters, these little fun guys that come after you even if you put down a decoy, so that's always something exciting as well. But when it works, it's kind of nice. When you're fighting a boss, the build is fun, but for clearing the campaign, especially on controller, I absolutely hate it. Maybe when we get to the next evolution, it'll be a lot better, but we can't get there until we're level 50, so abuse your decoys is the best I can tell you, and get a lot of attack speed, because otherwise this build is extremely rough. You are just way too squishy. Way too squishy. One attack and you're pretty much dead. So, not good. As usual, we're going to show you the first monolith, and we're going to hope for the best. We're just hoping. We do have our detonating arrows happening now, so that certainly helps. But we're going to be extremely careful, and I think we need to be. If we're not, it's going to be a hard life. A very hard life. Which is why I'm not just dashing around like a crazy person. It is not reasonable to think that I should be able to do that. Well, I just did an entire monolith and I cleared everything and no objective ever showed up. So that was really fun. But at least the build works for clearing out monoliths, so that's a plus. We can be happy about that. And in fact, it feels a lot better inside of a monolith than it did going through the campaign, that's for sure. Maybe that's because I actually took care of my gear and made all of my resistances and defenses actually a little higher and where they should be for doing these monoliths. I don't know why they keep making me fight the creatures that I hate the most in the game, but I guess that's where we're at. That is exactly where we're at for right now. So obviously I can't just show this first set of the monolith and do all the quests and then be done, because usually I only go to level 50 and this build doesn't even start until level 50, so instead of doing that, I'm just going to say for now that this build at this point works fine for monoliths. Even on controller, it's not that bad, and I'm very happy to be able to say that. I think that getting a lot of the extra throwing more traps and shooting out detonating arrows and all of this stuff really makes it work a lot better on this control scheme, so I'm happy about that. I'm going to skip until I'm completely done with this monolith and we're in the next build, though, because it's gonna be a long time of me just grinding, doing the same thing that I'm doing here. Well, we've actually hit level 51 now. I hit level 50 in Echo and just kept going and having to get a whole other level. You gotta love that. This is the only real respec that we have to worry about in the entire thing, and let me tell you, it is pretty light, and I'm happy for that. We don't like too aggressive of respecs, although it's going to be a little bit aggressive on our gear. So what do we actually need to do? Well, in our rogue tree, we're going to take out the points for lethal cadence and disembowel. We are no longer going to be focusing on those bleeds. We are replacing our puncture with smoke bomb, which is going to help us be a little bit more defensive and proc some dusk shroud. We've got our shurikens now that will be triggering on shift and circling around us as we go. And then we will also be removing bleed from our marksman tree, which we had in prolonged demise. The nice thing about these respecs is you can just take out the points you need to take out. It's not a complicated system of switching some and putting some back in, as you sometimes will have to do. So I think that that's pretty cool, and I'm really hoping that this build works a lot better and is a lot more defensive, because I have been dying all night and I am so over it, dude. I am so over it. And I know that the build is squishy, and I think that maybe there were some better ways I could have been playing the build, so it might just be my fault on this one. I don't know. But I feel like it's a very squishy build, and without the attack speed that you need, you're just not dropping things fast enough to be able to move around and dodge mechanics while simultaneously getting your damage in. So I'm looking for an upgrade to that right now, and I'm hoping we're going to get it. So looking at our guide here, we'll have a look at our final setup, since that's what we're moving into. It says you need to have a longbow, dreadthorn bow, or osprix bow equipped for this setup to work. And I wanted to know why that is. This one's 30 bow damage, this one's 48, this one's 60. Those aren't the thing, they're all different. This one has crit strike, this one has fire damage, this one has nothing. So what is the same about these bows? And the answer is that they're all slow. They all are very slow bows. These ones are 0.98, 0.98, this one is 0.92. with 60 damage. I wish they would have elaborated on that more so that you understand the build. Now we're going to be just spamming explosive trap again, exactly like we were before, except now that we have our detonating arrow as our main mana gain, we're going to be using that, and puncture is completely gone off of our bars. I'm sad to see it go. It got this rapid fire ability towards the end, and it was a lot of fun to use, and it had a good flow. I really disliked the build from level 5 to level 50 until it started to come together in the last few levels that I was playing it, and then it felt more natural and it felt like it was doing what it was meant to do. So now I'm nervous to switch because I liked where it was headed, finally, after all of that work. Still, we're going to be using decoy like we were before, and I'm glad that they tell us what skills they're actually putting on the hotbar. They don't always do that, and sometimes they're different than what you're actually specializing in. For instance, in this particular build, we are leveling our shurikens, but we are not casting our shurikens. We're just letting that happen from shift. Now, I do have a little bit of an issue here with this particular part of the guide. They have their standard, this is a level range of gear that you're looking for, and I understand why they do that. But it doesn't make any sense to me that they wouldn't just make this the level 50 guide. Like, you know you're respecking us at level 50, just put in the guide that it's switching your gear at level 50. I think that would make a lot more sense. They do want us to be using lightning penetration now, which is, it would be a very good thing to have. I'm not sure I even have the shards to be able to do that. But I am going to go through my gear again at this point and see if I can update it to match what they're talking about, what they're asking for here, which is no longer the physical damage that we had before. It's no longer chance to bleed that we had before. Now we're trying to shred armor, and we're trying to just increase bow damage in general and get as much lightning penetration as we can. So that makes for a whole new set of gear, an absolute whole new set of gear, and I do think that they should have said in here when they're doing their gear guide, by the way, level 50 is when you're switching this gear, not level 41, because you're not quite to that point yet. I suppose it kind of transitions smoothly, and it probably still works in this particular build. It's not like some of the other ones where you're directly stopping using ice and you're starting using fire. You were kind of using the lightning anyway. It's just ramping up at this point. So with all that said, I'm going to go fix my gear, and then we're going to test out the final form of this build, and hopefully it's amazing. All right, my brothers, they want us to be using lightning, and by God, we're going to do it. And I thought you might want to just see that I am slamming a little legendary power here. I got a legendary power 2 Gathering Fury, and I've got this bow that has plus 27 bow fire damage, but also a tier 5 lightning damage upgrade, and we're really hoping that we don't get the other two, but if we do, it is what it is. It's still going to be great for our character now. So, let's see exactly what we get here today. Are you ready, kids? Here it is. Oh, there we go. We got the lightning damage. I mean, I did really want the flat damage from the purple affix. That would have been really strong. But we got the lightning damage, and that's what I really wanted. So we're happy with that. I'll take the chill. That was the affix I wanted the least. But also, I got the one I wanted the most. So can't be mad about that. Well, I thought I was going to have to go much deeper than just the first monolith, but we actually got to the full end build by the time we got there, so I'm happy I didn't have to play it longer than that. To be honest with you, I did not like this build, and I'm sure you could tell from everything else I've said in the entire video. Now, the build that is the ultimate goal here is the Detonating Arrow build, which is not even using a bow at all. It works completely different, and I have a feeling that one's going to be a lot of fun. The thing is, this build would have been fun if I could have been at the end part where I'm just putting these explosive traps down and they're shooting arrows everywhere, and I don't really even need to aim it. Like, yeah, I kind of want to get the explosives in the right direction, but it's just clearing stuff off the screen for me. The problem is, I can only do that for so long, and then I run out of mana. With the real explosive trap and detonating arrow build, you basically have the ability to cast them for free, which means you can just walk and just keep casting, and it just keeps clearing off the screen, and you never have to stop. When I had to stop and do my detonating arrow as a hard cast, that felt real bad. It really did feel real bad. Now, the person who made this build is the same guy who made the Druid Guide. So it's not like he doesn't know what he's talking about or whatever. I think that he makes really, really good builds, and his guides for those builds are really good. I did not vibe with this one though, and there are some fun things about it, but I would say when you're playing this build, you cannot do what I normally do. Normally, I just run past everything, and I really took this for granted on the Necromancer build, where I literally didn't even have to press a button, and going through the campaign was a breeze. In this one, you definitely do need to be killing more things than you normally are. I would keep my level as close or above the area level if I could, and you kind of have to slow roll it anyway. If you get stuck with 40, 50 dudes on your screen, you might die. It gets real bad. And I did feel like there was a phase where the build with puncturing arrow and the explosive trap was coming together and feeling nice. I also felt at the end like it was starting to be a build that I could get behind. It was really slow and not fun getting mana back, but other than that, all the explosions, it was very cool looking, and it felt nice to blow things up that weren't even on the screen. And if that's what you're into, then I think that you should go for that. However, if you're looking for an easier time leveling or something that's going to just get you to the point where you can respec into doing a detonating arrow build, I don't think this is the one, man. I have had much more success doing things like Acid Flask. There are very easy to acquire uniques for that enable it to be even better than it was before. Now, I'm not saying that I'm better at making builds than these guys are, and I'm definitely not. 100% I am not. But I just feel like this build was trying to already be detonating arrow, and it doesn't get to. Does that make sense? So it's kind of trying to do the same things, and I'm sure if somebody playing it at a higher level would have had a lot more success than I did, but I just had a really, really bad time playing that. But the guide itself is really good. It's pretty clear on the type of gear that you're looking for, and at least 50% of my complaints would be solved if I was just naturally into playing this game with keyboard and mouse. I just really hate clicking to move. I really don't like it. If you have also tried this build, or if you do end up trying this build, and you have much better success than I did, then I really want to hear about that success in the comments below, and I would love for you to tell me how wrong I am, because I want it to be something that I'm doing wrong. I don't want it to just be that bad of a build. So I'm sure it is my fault, but I don't know exactly why it's my fault just yet. And it was even harder to be doing that because I got the daggers that I need just chilling. I already have them waiting to be doing the real detonating arrow, and I didn't have to do it this way. It didn't have to be like this, man. So I hope that this video brought some value to you, and if it did, then by all means subscribe, because I'm going through every subclass and I'm testing all of their guides from Maxroll, and I think that we're going to have a really good time doing that, and then we're going to get into the big endgame builds, and I'm going to take them probably up to level 80 minimum just to try them out, and there's going to be a lot of grinding. Some of that grinding just to get the levels is going to be on my stream, and I hope to see you there. For now, I want to thank you for watching. I have been RagePanda1, and I will see you in the next one.